I used to think about it a lot, like, oh, we could have done this and that, and if we had taken this direction. But it was only possible to do what we did and take the direction we took.
Hello and welcome to a special archival edition of the Who Cares Anyway podcast in memory of Stephen Bartholomew Clarke. Stephen was, among many other things that he did in his life, the guitarist for Arkansaw Man, a mostly instrumental trio that existed from 1980 to 1983. Now, I only ever spoke to Stephen at length once, and that was in this interview, which we did back in 2018, although I did get to meet him several years later, in 2023, when it came time to put together the book release event for Who Cares Anyway at ATA in San Francisco. And so one of the two musical acts that performed that night was the Owlmen, O-W-L, and that was, I think, a new name for a group of musicians that Stephen had been playing with in various configurations for some time. But they played that night, and that was March 2023, so almost exactly 2 years ago as I record this. And not only that, but I think it was just late last year that Stephen was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and so that was no doubt a shock. And then from there, it progressed pretty quickly. He passed away on February 20th, so about a month ago as I record this. And so I went back and listened to the interview and realized that even though the sound quality isn't great, it's certainly better than most of the book interviews that I did. And so I did my best to sort of clean it up and fix the audio levels and remove the noise as best as possible. But sort of as a tribute to him, I wanted to share at least an edited version of it, editing out some of the less productive digressions caused by some of the questions I asked, and to give some of the flavor of both Arkansaw Man and that time period, the early 80s when they were active. Again, I can't say that I personally knew him well at all, but I can at least get a sense of why he was so well liked by those who did know him well. And so sincere condolences to those friends and family, and hope you enjoy this interview from the archives with Stephen Bartholomew Clarke.
I was in New York. That's where I'm from, out in the suburbs on Long Island. And it was, I guess I arrived in San Francisco in October of 79.
And did you go out there by yourself or with the other?
I did.
Oh, okay.
No, I went out by myself. I knew one person. And basically, the month after I got there, he moved back. Maybe 2 months after, he moved back to the East Coast. So I was pretty much, I didn't know anybody, which was actually kind of excellent.
And I'm sure you already played guitar at that point. Right?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. How long had you been playing?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I had been playing in kind of like the mid 70s, kind of like post high school. But I always played around with the guitar even in high school. But I guess it was around 78. I was playing with another guitarist, this guy named Paul Sass. He's a New York guy, and we had an electric guitar duo. We played in CBGBs in 78 as the guitars, and it was just one gig, and it was kind of exciting. So I was kind of like checking out the CBGB scene in 77 and 78, and it was pretty intense, I think it was a little bit too intense for me. That's why I figured I should just get out of the East Coast. I need a little distance from my family too, just a little bit.
Yeah. When you say intense, like competitive or drug or?
No, not really the drug thing, but yeah, I guess the competitive thing and just, the whole urban thing. I mean, I was from Long Island. I was from the suburbs, and I moved onto East 2nd Street in 78. And it was just, it seemed just a lot of pretty intense. I mean, these bands also, I was already really kind of looking up to them. They were pretty sophisticated. Teenage Jesus and the Glenn Bronca, the Theoretical Girls. That was something that Thurston Moore did before he got into Sonic Youth. And so there was a lot of bands just doing stuff, and it was cool, but it was a little daunting for me.
Right. Yeah. And then so when you got out, did you know much about what was going on in San Francisco? Because I don't even know how many of those records even made it back east.
I hadn't heard anything. I had heard of the Dead Kennedys. Just I've heard of them. That was it. Yeah, basically at the end of '79, I just started going out and seeing bands. Just kind of checking out the scene.
So when you got there, it was kind of around the end of the Def Club era with.
Right. Yeah, I saw what were they? The Pink Section, and that's kind of like a, kind of that wing of like the Richard Kelly wing of that scene. The avant-garde, I would call it, really. Punk, I guess.
Yeah, because I always felt with the Club Foot stuff, it does. I know that they were from. I don't think it was Long Island, but anyway, it feels like New York City a little bit more, like the Club Foot LP, in terms of. I think of stuff like the Lounge Lizards, which I guess was pretty contemporary or concurrent.
Yeah. I mean, the Club Foot, they were doing that stuff even before the Lounge Lizards, I think. But it was, pretty much that same. They really had a pretty good and sharp attitude, pretty intellectual. Especially Richard Kelly and those guys. It was pretty great.
So, did you meet up with them pretty early on?
Yeah, we played a gig at the Club Foot. We just tried to get gigs. Mainly, The Sound of Music was our home. Maybe a lot of bands say that, but it's true. It was an easy place to get a gig, and eventually we got a gig in the Club Foot. And I don't even know. I know we played there once with the Pop-O Pies, but I don't think that was the first time. Because Joe, he moved a little bit later. I don't know by later what I mean, 81 or something. But we played at the Club Foot, and Richard Kelly liked it. He thought it was kind of hilarious. I remember him cracking up at one point. That was kind of nice. The drummer Glenn was very animated and kind of crazy. Had a little bit of an alcohol thing going from the beginning. I mean, I met him when he was 19, and I was like 22 or 23. And so, but yeah, I mean, the live shows were a little chaotic. We did a bit of improvising. It's almost like the other guys insisted on it because that's kind of like how we developed our music, just through jamming. And so the instrumental aspect of it was always, paramount. Occasionally someone would come up with an interesting little line, and we would, then we can insert that, even title the song that. But generally, we were pretty musically inclined. I mean, we tried to get a singer in the beginning. We would audition these people, and Glenn would meet these attractive women, and all of a sudden he would bring them in, be our singer, and it was like, this doesn't, there's really no connection here, Glenn. She's wonderful. So we ended up just being the three of us, just kind of shouting at the microphone.
Yeah, and so, I mean, how did you meet them? Because seems like there were a lot of people who were kind of going in and out of bands at that time, and around that Club Foot scene, but I don't remember seeing any of the names
right.
in the bands.
Well, one of the big things was being a bicycle messenger. I don't know if anyone's brought that up yet, because in like 1980 or 81 or 82, it was like everybody can get a job being a bike messenger. There was no internet, so anyone who needed something right away, and all those advertising agencies downtown. But anyway, Dominique, Bruce Luce, Craig. Have you heard Dee Dee at all? Dee Dee Wilkinson, I guess her name is now. She's a good friend of Bruce and also of Dominique, and she's a drummer. We all met I don't know if we all met, but I met them all through being a bike messenger. Kind of like getting this job, smoking some weed, and just driving downtown San Francisco all day, delivering envelopes of packages. It was pretty great. I mean, we didn't make a lot of money, but so anyway, to make a long story short, I met Glenn through that. Me and Patrick were both bike messengers, and Glenn came out of nowhere. He was in Houston. Glenn was in a group called The Hates. So he did that, but by the time he was 19, I guess he just needed a change. So he just came out to San Francisco. I'm not even sure. He might have known one person or something. Got himself, a lot of us lived in the Tenderloin. I lived on Ellis Street. Glenn lived like maybe on O'Farrell, just like 2 blocks away. People were living, in that. I mean, I had a studio for $150. That's, that doesn't even exist anymore. It's like a fantasy.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how we all met. The bassist I met because I had a connection to Buffalo, and there was a lot of people from Buffalo. Not a lot, but there were people from Buffalo coming out to the West Coast. So we had a couple of mutual friends, and I met Patrick, and he had a bass, and we just started jamming.
Okay, so you didn't live in an SRO, did you?
What's that?
Like a single room occupancy?
No. Oh, some people did that. Yes, but no. I lived in an apartment at like 370 Ellis Street, Ellis and Jones, and it was pretty gritty.
Yeah.
And fun. It's one of the few areas in San Francisco that looks somewhat the same. I mean, on Ellis is the Glide Memorial Church, so it's already going to attract people who are really kind of in need and kind of, homeless people. So that hasn't even changed. I was on that block, and I kind of like driving through there now because it kind of looks the same. The Sound of Music was on Turk Street, 2 blocks closer to Market, and that's the Tenderloin.
There was a rehearsal place across the street from there. Is that?
Yeah. Right. The practice pads downstairs where some people ended up staying and living, even though there were no windows, no nothing. Just like one bathroom that was a little messy. And that was a great place, of course, because it was very, it was like a little strange underground community. That was fun.
Well, are the recordings pretty representative of what you all were doing?
I think so, yeah. I mean, we tried to pick our best songs and throw them on the recordings. And have you heard the single? It's probably on YouTube. Every Job.
Yeah.
Mark Twain. That's maybe a little more pop, isn't it? I mean, I'm asking, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to analyze right now. Because we started out really chaotic, and then it was we were blending chaotic with a little bit more, a little bit of order. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. But with Glenn on drums, it was always going to be chaos. Our last gig we played, it was in Denver, Colorado on the way back, and he said, "Tonight I'm just going to play anything I want." And basically, after the third song, a fight broke out because he was directing such intense chaos into the audience. I mean, like the PA, the column was being knocked over, and people were fighting. And I was like, "This is Glenn. Let's just play the fucking songs." But he was a great drummer, and he had to do his thing. Some people, they have to do what they do. I mean, that's art.
Yeah. No, I mean, there was a time period, it was early 2000s, when I was listening to a lot of, two or three piece bands that were playing a lot of really intricate instrumental, mostly instrumental or totally instrumental stuff. But, that you might go to a show and see 2 or 3 different bands doing some, whether it was guitar, bass, and drums, or just guitar and drums, or just bass and drums, or something like that. But I don't think there was a blueprint for what y'all were doing.
No, we were trying to actually avoid all blueprints. That's true. Although, we would hear something like the Gang of Four, and it would be like, wow, they're doing a completely organized version of what we're doing, and they're also doing it very beautifully. They were so. But we didn't. We weren't using their blueprint. There were bands. The Fall. They played with a beat, but that stuff was completely original. They were the best band of the early 80s, The Fall, Mark Smith and all that. They just had that. The band was excellent, and he was undeniable, A little sour, but you know what? Fucking amazing. So yes, but that's a good point. It was almost about avoiding any semblance of a blueprint, and at that point, it gets a little conscious, And then you go back to let's just play. Let's just play. It'll be fine.
Was there ever a time when you heard stuff later on and thought, this is kind of what we were doing?
No, I mean, I'm sure it's out there, and I don't even know how I would feel about it. I'd probably be alarmed, or probably jealous, because if I'm hearing of them, that means they're getting it out there. But, I'm sure there's bands. I mean, basically what we did was experiment, So if you're going to really experiment and throw away the blueprints, you'll end up with something that's a little chaotic and maybe not as smooth. I mean, Arto Lindsay, the guitarist, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a sound that I can go with, I mean, he influenced what I was doing a lot. That I would say that.
Huh.
But yes, I'm glad people are finding their sound. That's what everyone should do. Keep playing.
Were you all always guitar, bass, and drums, or were there other instruments ever?
There were, in fact, in '83, when we were kind of working ourselves up to go on tour, we had a trombone player and a sax player, and they would jam with us, and they started playing a few gigs. We did a Tool and Die gig with the two, and it was nice because they know us pretty well. Darryl Eder and Ken Kearney, just two really cool guys, and so they would play with us. But it was kind of like that further end. It was near the time we were going on tour, and Darryl, actually, the trombone player, came on tour with us. We toured with 4 people, actually, and that was fine. So yeah, we had that for a while. We had a couple extra people playing with us, doing a little rehearsals. We basically broke up after we toured in '83. By the time we got to New York, I was like having a nervous breakdown. It wasn't even anything going on to precipitate it. It was just like all these gigs, not getting a lot of money. Some of them, like, Milwaukee, 95 degrees, 3 people show up. They give us $5. I don't even know if I'm rambling now. Why?
No.
I mean, I had my coffee 3 hours ago.
No, I actually was going to ask. I didn't know that you all toured. Was it? Were you all just going out on your own?
No, we toured basically thanks to Subterranean, Steve Tupper, and also Kathy Hatch, who was helping him run Subterranean in the early '80s, and we did a single with them after the EP. So we did the EP with Richard Kelly, Modern Masters, Richard and Cindy, and then we did a single by ourselves. We just, went into Tom Allen's studio because that's where we had originally done some stuff, and we made a single, got it pressed, and then Subterranean distributed it and decided they will help us arrange a tour. So that was pretty awesome. Because I guess the other bands, Flipper and whatnot, already been out there by '83.
So you all were actually driving across the whole country?
We bought a van, left on July 19th, 1983, and played, 24 shows. It's pretty ballpark. We made it up to Toronto. We played in Buffalo. We basically Highway 70 and Highway 80, where we were. I mean, our first gig wasn't until Denver or something. In fact, that was on the way back. So nothing west of Denver. Crazy.
Wow. Okay, because I wasn't sure how long you all.
Well, we were 3 years, just about exactly 3 years. We were like the fall of 1980 to the fall of 1983.
And pretty steadily throughout that time.
Yeah, that's all we did. I mean, we worked as bike messengers, and eventually I started driving the van for the delivery company. Craig was driving the van. Dominique was driving a van for Redco. That was the best company. And but that was it from 80 to 83. And matter of fact, when I got back in 83, they, at the end of the year, they let me come back and work again. So that was nice. Nice folk.
Yeah.
Where were we?
Yeah. Well, so because I'm thinking about all that sort of transpired in those years in terms of things changing. I mean, one thing would be well, all the hardcore stuff that was going on, but it doesn't seem like you all would ever have been a band that really like fit into any broader
No.
thing. But I don't know if over time, if it got to be more difficult to do that kind of music, or like in terms of people or audiences being more narrow or expecting.
I think personally, and I'll rethink this, but I really appreciate the question. I think the internal stresses were bigger than the external stresses with us. Glenn and Patrick wanted to kind of stay the course and play really, really out there, jagged, but not straight ahead. It really was never hardcore, except that, this playing was pretty strong, but it was always a little bit off kilter and arty, I mean, if there's art punk, that's probably us.
Yeah.
But I, quite honestly and confessionally, I wanted to be a little bit more pop, I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be the fucking Police, but I was like, damn, these guys, they're playing these gigs, they get to chill, they're on TV, it's, come on, it's too hot here in Milwaukee for $5. I can't fucking do this. I'm going to lose my fucking mind. So there you go. But externally, it's funny you brought up the hardcore thing, because some of that stuff I freaking loved. And, later on it was the Farm. It was a big venue. And I actually ended up moving back to New York in 85, just for a year. And when I got back in 86, the Farm was kind of rolling. And they had hardcore bands. They had, the big bands coming up were the Butthole Surfers, who did a single with Subterranean, I think. Maybe.
I think Alternative Tentacles, maybe.
Okay, yes, right. You know what I'm thinking of actually is Tragic Mulatto. Have you heard of Tragic Mulatto? Gail would walk around on Perk Street between the practice pad, which is across the street, and the Sound of Music, barefoot. And it's like, Church Street was just like, alcohol, needles, people throwing up, sex. It was, the place was oozing. And she'd be stomping around barefoot, fine. Everything's fine. It was like, whoa. But they were a great band. But anyway, I kind of thought, like, as the 80s progressed, past 83 into 84 and 85, that things got more poppy, I felt like, God, everything is getting a little kind of softer now and polite. That's kind of my take, except then there was the Butthole Surfers and, like, Sonic Youth even, were at least kind of, like, keeping to their sound, They had a sound and they were going to stay with it. We just personally had a sound, and then internally it just kind of started to unravel. And then Glenn moved to New York. When we went there in New York in 83, he was like, I'm moving here. So by December of 83, Glenn had split, which was fine because I was done anyway. I was like, no, I won't do this. I'm going crazy.
Did you all rehearse at a Club Foot place, or was it on Minna Street, or?
I lived there. Who told you about that place?
Joe told me about the Minna, and then somebody else mentioned that they had like two sites, or I mean, they had the Club Foot space, and then there was another space.
Well, Richard and Cindy had what do you even call it? It was a tiny little building, I guess. I don't want them to make it sound impressive. A 2-story place where the upstairs was where they lived. The middle was where the kitchen, the ground floor was the kitchen and a couple of bedrooms that they rented out, where me and Glenn rented. And then the basement was a rehearsal space that you can rent. So there was that set up. And we rehearsed downstairs. Now, there might have been other things on Minna Street also, but this was where Richard and Cindy lived, and also in the basement was a rehearsal space.
Oh, okay. Did he die before y'all went on tour?
No, this is something I left out. We were in Chicago when we found out that he committed suicide in the house where we were living, me and Glenn. We were renting the rooms there on the first floor. So that was really kind of tough. That was a drag. To me, he was kind of like the ringleader of that whole thing. There were lots of very vibrant personalities involved. And they always seemed a little bit older. I mean, I think they were maybe a year or two older than us, but they always seemed really erudite, socially aware, and a little bit aloof, to be frank, but lovely. I mean, it was fun, even hanging out with Richard. But, he was struggling. He was definitely struggling.
Did that become more noticeable over time then?
I don't know. I mean, we were really pretty self-involved, us three boys, and so we just kind of did our thing. And I mean, because everybody, in those scenes, it was like, well, it's supposed to be edgy. So if someone is doing serious drugs, it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of part of the landscape here. I was pretty fortunate because, I'm pretty sensitive to drugs. So if I ever did cocaine, I mean, I've done cocaine, and when I did cocaine, it was just like I was just a wreck for days. I couldn't even do anything like that 2 days in a row. So I was fortunate.
So yeah, because you mentioned when we talked briefly last week that you all were on the more antisocial end, and I didn't know what that meant. If it was just in terms of not being extroverts, or
no, not at all. I meant it in more of a negative way than that. And I'm not bragging, We, I don't know Glenn's background in high school, but I felt like he was kind of probably not really considered cool. But anyway, that's common. What I meant was we liked certain bands, but a lot of bands we just didn't care about, even if they had certain talents. We kind of just picked and chose, and we stayed away from certain scenes. Glenn was rude on stage. He'd make jokes about Howard Klein. And I was like, Glenn, shut the fuck up. The dude's on the radio, and who cares what he's like, So he would just, the guy's just doing his thing. And Glenn's like, oh, look at this guy, he's bald. And I'm like, shut up, man. What, And meanwhile, I probably did think it was kind of funny, but on stage, I'm like, it's not even like I was aggressive enough business-wise to make a connection with somebody like that. We just thought we were better than a lot of people, especially if they weren't musicians. It's like, come on, these people don't know what's going on. I think it was just a manifestation of our insecurity, I'm very philosophical now.
So did you all have certain bands that you played with frequently, or?
Yes. Well, we played with the Plastic Medium. We played with the Animal Things a lot. We played with the Toiling Midgets a number of times, which was great. We played with them at this club that did a few shows with this guy named Michael Barbeau. I don't know why I remember his name, but I don't remember what the name of the club was. But it was the night that Manson was being interviewed on Tom Snyder. And the Toiling Midgets had an array of TVs behind them because they timed it so that they were going on when Tom Snyder was interviewing Manson. And that was a pretty nice touch, I thought. But we played Toiling Midgets, those guys. The band called the Wilma.
Okay, yeah.
All ladies, feminists back then in 1980. They were excellent, and they had a toughness to them too. They were really great, and we played with them. And they weren't boys, but they were very cool. The Wild Nixons. Oh, that's I'll tell you one thing. Steve Bauman, he's still the same. He's I don't do Facebook too much, but when I kind of established that Facebook thing 5 years ago, there he was, kind of just really brilliant but bitter, and there's this certain personality in artists where they have to balance their brilliantness with their bitterness, otherwise they just they can't maintain, But I think he's done pretty good. He was in the Wild Nixons. He was the leader of it. And then he was in Ultimately Sammy. But he was, and they played a lot of Sound of Music and was very, very much listening to their own sound, you know. They really stayed true to their sound. They didn't have any secret pop aspirations the way I did, you know. You know, Reagan got elected in 1980, and everyone before that was like, oh, he's just some television guy. He's not going to get elected. This is a joke. And we all realized we don't know anything about politics or society. You know, we're all these 20-odd kids who think they know things. So I think it was and of course there were like 10,000 nuclear warheads pointed in all directions. And in a way it was like, great, we don't have to even participate in this bullshit, you know. Let's just create something. So, and of course, you know, as a reaction to all that stuff, it would be somewhat on the dark or cynical side, even if it is humorous. It's kind of cynical.
Yeah, no, I that's where this is kind of where I go back to Flipper as sort of the I don't know, I want to say the right mindset, but it's sort of.
Oh, they were like a total joy. They did their own thing. They had a guitarist who had no, you know, really didn't even have any imitators because no one knew what the fuck he was doing, you know. He was like a blacksmith, just up there fucking banging on an anvil. And they were also extremely tough, you know. Will Shatter was, you know, they were throwing beer cans. There was a parade of beer cans throwing at him when they opened for Public Image in 1980. And at one point, he was playing the bass and staring out into the audience. And one of them hit him right in the forehead, and he didn't even fucking blink. And I was like, "Oh my God, these guys, they're for real." It was really nice. It was fun. The Public Image wasn't even interesting after I saw Flipper.
Huh.
So there, they were unstoppable. You know, they were going to do their thing.
So when you met Bruce, or when we were bike messaging, that was a little later.
It was. That might have been like 82 or something. And I remember we were sitting there, and, you know, we didn't really know each other, but we have some mutual friends, like, you know, Dominique and this woman named Dee Dee. And he had just written that song, That's the Way of the World. And he was just like reciting the lyrics while we were sitting there at lunch. And I was like, God, he's very uninhibited. He's just telling you about these new lyrics he wrote. I was just kind of impressed, you know. He was enthusiastic. Oh, his songs are very special, though. I mean, a lot of people talk about Will Shatter songs. I remember back then, you know, Will was a little older, and maybe he had already been doing some stuff, but I always loved Bruce's songs. I lived on Dolores and 30th with Dee Dee and a couple other people, and he would even come by once in a while because they were friends. And we had the big Gemini party. Dee Dee's birthday is in June, and that was, you know, everybody was there, so I would see people then. But, you know, it's not like we ever hung out. Oh, and I once went over his house. He lived on Haight Street. And I remember it because we went over there and we were smoking weed, and he had a cat, so maybe his girlfriend. And I got completely allergic and was just like almost freaking out. But these are my memories of Bruce. He always seemed like a pretty decent guy, but you know, I mean, to me, they were like pretty much at the top. They were the best band. I liked them better than the Dead Kennedys, and that's not to take anything away from them, because Biafra was very tenacious, and the musicians were superb. But I just like Flipper's End of the World style, you know. It was beautiful. I mean, they were actually physically big, too. I mean, compared to people like me, anyway. You know, me and Glenn and Patrick, we were all pretty much these, you know, 5'8" kids. And they seemed a little bigger and a little, I mean, Falcone, I don't know. I think he's a Vietnam vet.
Yeah.
I think he was already like 35 or 40 when he was playing Flipper, and it was like, damn, these guys are serious. Well, I think in San Francisco, I mean, there were some people who were from there or from the general area, right? But a lot of other people were getting away from something, you know? I mean, I ended up meeting a lot of people who were not from the area, from New York and from Buffalo, and even from the South there in the L.A. area. People needed to get away from their life, whether it was dull or stifling or whatever. And so I think San Francisco became like one of those havens where people were coming, and it's like, yeah, I'm from wherever, so they ended up in San Francisco. But there was that commonality. It's like, yeah, we had to get away. I knew like 5 people who moved from Buffalo at that point, and that was kind of cool.
Did you stay in the area the whole time, even after?
I stayed in San Francisco till '85. Then I hitched a ride with the Muskrats out to the East Coast. I don't know if you know that duo. They recorded at Malin. They were entertainment. Good players too. And so I got a ride with them. I even did some solo shows opening for them because they were doing a tour across the country. And when we got to the East Coast, I stayed. That was the plan, I moved my stuff in with my brother's place, lived with him for a few months, moved into my friend's place on 6th Street in New York by First Avenue. Still there. My friend Alan moved to New York. I think it's San Francisco. 6th Street in New York. He moved there like in '79, and he still has the same apartment. Pretty cool. Anyway, I lived in New York for a year. Then I moved back to San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
So I lived till about '93. Then I moved with a girlfriend up to rural Washington, where I lived in a trailer for 3 years with no electricity. And so now you know.
Did you ever try to do another band in San Francisco, or was it kind of just?
I did. I tried to do some pop bands, and I don't know. They were kind of interesting, a little bit of this and that, and by then it was like the American Music Club was doing gigs, and, we would open up for them. We played at the Farm. I think the band was called Critical Chip that I was in. But no, nothing, I mean, we have some home recordings and stuff, but I moved on from it pretty quick, I'll have to admit. But then I started playing a lot with the improvisers after Arkansaw Man. A lot of more East Bay people. There's a guy named Dave Slusser, and there was this thing that was happening in the '70s. Zorn, Chad Bourne, Bruce Ackley, Henry Kaiser, all those guys.
Yeah.
So that kind of improv scene also was very attractive. Because I was, I'd been into the jazz stuff and the Ornette and the Sun Shift by Coltrane and all that stuff. So that was influencing Arkansaw Man, by the way. More than any of the blueprints. It's like I played Sun Shift for the drummer, Glenn, and he was like, yes, Elvin Jones, that's superb. So, but anyway, in the later '80s, that's what I did. I started doing more with the improvisers. We had a band called Pluto. We played for a bunch of years. And now I'm still playing with them. I'll go over to my friend Dave's house, and he's one of these Zorn alumni. He's done the Zorn stuff.
Right.
For the past couple of decades, David Slusser. He's pretty awesome. He wisely bought a house in like 1984,
Oh, wow.
So, yes. So he has a basement, and now I'm back to playing in the basement like I did when I was a fucking teenager. And it's kind of nice. Recording is hard, and then having that be representative of what you do is hard. Everything can't be just that spontaneous. Here's what we did at this practice pad, or live gigs is nice, but having a quality recording of live gigs is really tough.
Did you all ever get close to doing a full length, or was that kind of out of the question?
Well, I think the single maybe was done. I don't know if the date is on there. Was it like early '83 or something? So we went on tour in July, and that was it. We were done. So I mean, we did record some other stuff that could have ended up being on an album. Maybe there's like 4 or 5 things. But, you know, at that point, I think we were going through our internal stuff where I think I was trying to pull it into a little bit more of a pop direction. And, you know, I'm working against a bassist and drummer who are pretty established in the sound they're making, you know. They're not exactly there to take directions, you know. So I don't know if we, you know, I used to think about it a lot, you know, like, oh, we could have done this and that, and if we had taken this direction. But it was only possible to do what we did and take the direction we took. So there was no album forthcoming.